Okay, amazing. So first of all, thank you both Assemblymember Bryan and Kirk for joining today. This discussion is really part of the same side community is that um, we provide a topic every month and give our community space to come together to educate themselves, to collaborate, and come together in community for action on topics that a lot of people say, I want to do more to get involved, but I don't know how. And so we chose the topic of police reform, specifically in June. The obvious choice would have been Pride. But we wanted to choose police reform because we wanted to recognize that we're 1 year removed, or what, at the 1 year mark of the protests of summer 2020 that really shook the world, and I think seemingly, put into the consciousness of most Americans just where we are in terms of systemic racism, bias, and whatever else you want to throw in there when it comes to Black and Brown communities, particularly within policing, but also the broader culture. And so we're really excited to have both of you here today, just to have this discussion, to hopefully educate and show people like that summer happened. It's not over. We haven't achieved everything we want. There's still a lot to be done. There was a lot of momentum. Let's keep it going, and here's what we can do. So that's the premise of this discussion. We're going to share it with our community, our wider community. And so I'm really honored and grateful to have you both here today for it. So before I get started, let me introduce you both. First, welcome Assemblymember Isaac Bryan. He was elected to represent California's 54th Assembly District in May 2021. So very fresh off a big win. Congratulations. And prior to his election, Assemblymember Bryan served as the founding director of the UCLA Black Policy Project, a think tank dedicated to advancing racial equity through rigorous policy analysis. Isaac also co-chaired the successful Measure J campaign in Los Angeles County, a ballot measure that allocated money for investment in youth development, small business support, job training, alternatives to incarceration, affordable housing, community mental health, and substance abuse treatment, and other systems of care. Thank you. For years, Isaac's academic and organizing work has been at the intersection of environmental, economic, education, and housing justice. And for Assemblymember Bryan, these issues aren't just academic or policy questions, they are deeply personal. He grew up in a family of 15 as one of 9 adopted children. Amazing. Several members of his family have struggled with houselessness, faced incarceration, and have struggled with substance abuse and mental health challenges. So Assemblyman Bryan has lived it, he's organized around it, built diverse coalitions, and led historic reforms to help bridge the gap between inequity and opportunity. Most importantly, he is a fellow UCLA grad with a master's in public policy, so go Bruins. And thank you for being here today. I also want to introduce my co-host for this discussion, Kirk Brown. Kirk is the founder of Melanin Meetups, a think platform that creates monthly private safe spaces for Black Americans to help heal, connect, and ideate to shape the African American experience through industry and policy. By bridging the gap of lack of access to mental health care services and strategic influence, Melanin Meetups blends elements of a think tank and talk therapy to advance members of the community. Through shared discussions, the community is able to ideate and provide data on best ways to move forward, unpacking the trauma along the way. Kirk, that is amazing. I'm really honored for you both to be here. I think this is going to be a very powerful discussion, and I hope that it will help our broader community, which is a really diverse coalition of people who come from all backgrounds, but who really care and want to be part of the solution, just aren't really sure how and what's meaningful for them and what's right for them. So hopefully we can walk away from this discussion and everyone will have something that they can take with them and put into their own lives and lifestyle to help advance both racial equity, racial justice, and in particular, police reform. So thank you both. I want to start by asking Assemblymember Bryan. So you went from activist to assemblyman. Can you just tell us a little bit about that journey and how you got there?
Nicole, thank you for having me. And Kirk, it's good to be with you, brother. Um, I don't fully see it as a going from an activist or an organizer to an assembly member. I'm still an organizer and an activist, right? You don't lose that part of your soul just because you've sought a way to make change on in a different platform. I've always had kind of a policy orientation to the work that I do. So in organizing and in fighting for change, for me, I always had to do more than just be outside protesting. I was always out there protesting, and we always have to be out there protesting. But for me, it was tying that to tangible policy change and solutions. And the more that I did that work, the more I lived at that intersection between the academy, the universities, community organizing. I had worked for a couple elected officials. I realized that no matter where I was, I ended up lobbying or advocating to a person in a position of influence to just do the right thing, right? To change policy, to introduce legislation, to vote,
Mhm.
to make a difference. And I got frustrated. And so I decided that I'd try to fill one of those seats. And if the community saw fit to put me in one of those seats, then I would be that office that you don't have to advocate to do the right thing for. You don't have to fight to push me to vote yes on the things that truly matter for us. It's the whole reason that I would be there. And the community saw fit to put me here. And so the journey has been one of collaboration, one of solidarity, one of togetherness. And I'm excited to start this new role here in the California legislature.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you join the system to change the system. And, at same side, or in my personal beliefs, I really believe that a lot of systemic change comes through policy. So what is sort of what do you think is the biggest impact you can make now being in a position of power versus what you could do as an activist?
Yeah, so I think the idea of joining the system to change the system is one that I grapple back and forth with, right? Because I feel like some systems were designed to be harmful, right? They're not just broken; they were designed to work the way that they're functioning, and those are harder to join on the inside and reform, so to speak. But our elected officials, our state legislature, you could make the argument that state governments are similar in that fashion in terms of parts of our community never fully being represented in our state legislature. But by and large, these are the bodies for and by the people, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a lot more flexibility and autonomy to really fight for the things that you believe in. And so from this position, I'm allowed to rally. There's 120 people and the governor in the state of California who decide the rules for 40 million people.
Mhm.
In fact, this past Monday, we voted on a 260 plus billion-dollar budget, right? And so making sure that those resources go to the communities that were most impacted, making sure that those resources don't just go on to inflate systems of harm that exacerbate the root causes of inequity in society, but instead go to systems of care and opportunity and working families and struggling communities. That's the real position of influence that I'm in right now. And that's the reason, quite frankly, we need more organizers running for
Mhm.
office, and we need more communities that are willing to step up and fight for our representation in local governments and state governments and at the federal level.
Right, right. I mean, elections are so important. Voting for somebody who represents your values is so important exactly for this reason. Like, you are there, you are representing the community and the policies that a lot of the movement of the last year really wants to represent. It is, we can look at a direct line to you now being in office and being able to make that power. And
And
it's
I'll give you a really real example too. So in
please.
this race, uh, there were six of us running for this seat. And if one of us didn't take 50% plus one vote, there was
Mhm.
going to be a runoff till July. The problem with that is all of the bills from the state assembly have to be pushed over to the Senate by
Mhm.
the middle of June. And the state budget gets voted on in June. So if we went to a runoff, there would be no voice all the way until July. Because I was able to cross that 50 plus one percent threshold, I got in June in time to vote on over 300 bills before they left the assembly and on the budget. One of those bills was a bill to limit the use of gang enhancements in California, right? Which is a racist sentence enhancement that we throw on Black, Brown, poor, and Indigenous communities. And that bill had been voted on just 2 weeks before I got here. You need 41 votes to get out of the assembly. It had 40. They held on to it, hoping that I would be there. Just 2 weeks later, I came in. I was the 41st vote. It's now in the Senate to get passed on that side as well. And so elections really quite literally have consequences on our lives. And I was incredibly proud. People have asked me, well, how does it feel to be there? It feels like we've made a difference already, right? And it feels like we're where we're supposed to be.
Exactly. These are the stories that I think need to be told loud and wide, because especially when, when we have our federal elections and, people aren't inspired by maybe the sexier, offices of president or Senate, but also on the ballot oftentimes are these state level or city level, and this is where the direct impact happens. And it's so awesome to see this in real time and have you share your story, and we hope we can spread that out far and wide about why it's so important to just pay attention to who's representing you and who supports your values. I want to pivot a little bit back to police reform, because I know that was a big part of your work. It's also what we're focusing on this month, because again, it's 1 year later from the protests. You couldn't scroll a second on Instagram without seeing a Black square or commitment to anti-racism work, particularly from white people. And it feels a little bit like that momentum has stalled. And I think that's also, again, by design. They have stalled a lot of the legislative policies and hoping that people lose interest. And so, but can you just give us an overview from your perspective of where we are in police reform, maybe in California and as a whole? And, what eventually we'll get to, like, other things that we can do to help push it along.
Yeah, well, we're not nearly far enough, right? Not nearly far enough. Here in California, for example, last year after the murder of George Floyd, we introduced a piece of legislation, it was before I got here, that if you get fired from one police department for misconduct, that you are decertified from being able to hold a law enforcement position in the rest of the state of California. No other department should be able to hire you. There are a number of states that have this law. It's a common sense law. The entire country should have a decertification process. In California, that bill didn't make it out of the state assembly, the body that I'm in right now, last year. It's been brought back this year. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to pass it through and get it onto the governor to be signed. But those kind of common sense pieces of legislation, they got stalled last year, and we've tried to move on and forget about them. But at the same time, we haven't stopped the conditions that resulted in George Floyd losing his life, right? Even during the trial, a lot of us were hoping for a verdict that we could celebrate, if you will, knowing that true justice would be George Floyd being alive today. But at the same time, we've got Dante Wright's murder happening at that very moment, just a few miles away. And I don't want to pray for another verdict. I don't want to have to pray for verdict after verdict after verdict, knowing that history doesn't show that those result in the kind of accountability that the community is demanding. We have to continue to reform the system. And one of the ways we have to do that is continue to question the size and scope of our law enforcement agencies when we have so many people hurting, right? You can't criminalize your way out of poverty. You can't criminalize your way out of homelessness. And every resource we spend incarcerating somebody who's living on the street or somebody who's struggling is a resource we could have directed towards building up care and opportunity. And that's something we have to question in a state like California, where we spend over $13 billion on state corrections expenditures, which is more than we spend on the University of California system. In the city of Los Angeles, we spend over $1.8 billion every single year on the LAPD, but we only allocated $1.2 billion over 10 years to fight homelessness. Right? We have to think about the way we're spending our resources, and through doing that, we can have a more lasting transformation in our criminal legal system, in our police department. And it's part of why we ran Measure J. Measure J was to do that, to call for 10% of the unrestricted county revenue to go towards affordable housing, youth development, small business support, alternatives to incarceration, and prevent the sheriff's department from accessing those resources, right? Building up care and opportunity, not crime and punishment. That's something we have to keep fighting for.
Yeah, absolutely. Kirk and I were preparing yesterday for this discussion, and again, my focus, just personally, it's my background and is really on policy and getting more people involved and engaged in policy. And the work that Kirk does is really focused on, bringing the community together, focusing on mental health, accessing mental health resources, having a space to talk it through. And Kirk, I know your work is really focused on a more holistic approach. And I think both of these things come to, it's not like we'll pass one piece of legislation and miraculously the trauma is healed. We'll have, a happy, harmonious society. It's a lot of these things together. So Kirk, I know that you have some questions for Assemblymember Bryan as well, and in terms of the spaces that you provide and the work that you do that you want to discuss with him also. So I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm curious about, I guess I should talk a little bit about what happens in a Melanin Meetup. Is it's all about unpacking the Black American experience, right? I mean, on top of individual trauma, there's, a collective trauma within Black bodies. And so in order to ideate ways to move us forward, we have to be emotionally available to our own experience. So, even with activism and what we're seeing first of all, it's great to be here, Nicole. Thank you. And great to meet you too, Isaac. In terms of activism, right? It's just like, I was talking to Nicole, I think it was the first time that the country really, truly got a taste of the Black American experience. Like I'm talking 360, they saw it all. And that's what we carry around every day. And with digital lynchings and scrolling on Instagram, and you're seeing the deaths. I still haven't watched, I was telling Nicole, I still haven't watched the death of George Floyd because I don't want to see it. I already know it. How do you, I guess, Isaac, how do you process these things in order to continue to do the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I definitely love everything that you do and everything that you just brought to light, because there is this kind of collective healing that you have to do while simultaneously staying in the work. Because as Nicole mentioned, if you let your foot off the gas for even a second, progress gets stalled or gets rolled back. And so for me, I have just some incredible people in my life. I find times to meditate. I go for walks. I listen to music. I just find ways to root myself in purpose, and I take all of that trauma, all of that pain, and turn it into a fire, right? Because I'm in a position to do something about it every single day. On a bad day, I can speak on it. On a good day, I can pass legislation on it, and that's a privilege. And so I carry that privilege with the grace of all of those who are counting on folks like me to make that difference. But I do my best to find times for self-care. It's usually Sunday afternoons. Growing up, I went to church on Sundays. And so, Sunday afternoons, it was like nap time. It's like quiet time. Even Jesus rested on Sundays type thing. That's usually when I do my reflecting and kind of find a peace to pick back up in the new week.
Yeah. I did want to say, I think what's interesting about our generation is that, I was telling Nicole, we're students of history. We've seen what's happened to our leaders, and we've seen what's happened to just our communities, right? But I think for the first time, we're really beginning to see, okay, at the end of the day, what is the ask, right? Like truly, what is the ask of our community? And there can be multiple asks. But at the same time, as we're fighting this fight, whether we want to have the conversation around generational wealth, or we do want to talk about pushing legislation, all of these different asks, we can get there. But yet, what happens when we get there? We're going to have to deal with the emotional fallout, if you will, of all the time and energy it took to get there, at the same time processing what we're fighting against. So yeah, I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think on all these fronts, what we like to talk about at Same Side is, you've got to find a way that is authentic to you to get involved, but whatever it is, just get involved, do something, whether it's joining an organization that is doing the work, whether it's protesting, whether it's doing your own research. I think these are all things that are important, and they're stepping stones on, the ladder of engagement that we talk about. Assemblymember Bryan, what are some things that you recommend for, maybe people just getting started, or people who are really into the movement, or kind of like came into the movement last year and maybe have fallen off because this work is exhausting, progress is slow, but it does happen, and because we need every voice involved. So what are some ways that you recommend people getting involved, or taking action to move this issue forward?
So learning is a form of action. It's critically important, right? Do your reading, do your homework, come to conversations like this, find people who can continue to push your bounds and understandings of the way the carceral system impedes in our life and has historically, right? We've got Juneteenth coming this week, that thinking critically about emancipation and how long it took to get to Galveston, Texas, but then thinking about the fact that we have 2.3 million people still incarcerated in the United States, right? The largest mental health provider in California is the Los Angeles County jail system, and that's not uncommon of other jurisdictions. So finding the linkages between the vestiges of slavery and modern day society and how that manifests in police encounters as well. There's just a lot to learn, from history to action to organizing to strategies to tactics to policy. You can never stop learning, but then apply that into action. Never be afraid to go out and protest. They're happening all over the country all the time. Vote. Do your research on candidates, hold them accountable for the things they run on. Criminal justice reform has been a very sexy thing to run on for a little bit now, right? I'm going to reform the criminal justice system, the criminal injustice system. We come up with great catchphrases, and then folks get into office and they take money from law enforcement unions and they lay stagnant on the promises that they made, right? And we have to hold folks accountable in the same way that we hold them accountable for other issues that matter in our lives. The other thing I would say is educate your family as you continue to get more and more educated. And I say that because I was adopted by 2 white folks. That's a part of the bio that doesn't come out until you get to know me. But they adopted 6 Black children, it's in addition to having 4 of their own. And so there's a lot for us to do in our own families and spheres of influence. Immediate conversations at our dinner tables, where they are conversations that the rest of the country may not be ready to have, but your mama's ready to have it. Dad's ready to have it. Your uncle, your auntie, your friend is ready to have it. And you're the right messenger, especially as you continue to learn yourself. And the more folks we activate to these issues, the more we all fight in solidarity for the just world that we actually all want to live in, the easier it's going to be to push things forward, especially when we feel like they've stalled, right? That just means we need more people on the front lines fighting with us. And those of us that are still in the struggle, still in the fight, have a responsibility to go recruit those folks. Because I think all of us have a vision for the way this country can and should be, have a vision for our communities that is rooted in the same values. It's really not that different. And we just have to tap into that.
Right. Yeah, that was the genesis of the name Same Side. It's like, at the end of the day, we all want, a roof over our head, our families to be safe, healthy, and that's it, and that those are our commonalities that we can all fight for. And that's great. And I'm glad you mentioned educate yourself, because we are releasing our Learn List tomorrow in Same Side, which has just a lot of really great resources, both podcasts, books, blog posts, everything, articles to learn, to get started. And that's something you can do, on your own as an introvert, or, and then start moving your way up and getting more involved. So, that sounds very doable for a lot of people, I think, because I think a lot of people get intimidated that, they need to be out protesting, or they need to be, getting heavily involved, and it kind of stops people. It's a high barrier to entry for a lot of people, but just recognizing it's okay to just start by reading an article, reading a book, educating yourself, listening to a podcast. So that's a really, really great suggestion. Last, Kirk, I don't know if you have any other questions for Assembly member or something you want to discuss with him. I have one more question.
No, I think I'm good.
Good. So next week, we're going to be talking to Darren Harris, who's Congresswoman Karen Bass's chief of staff, about the Justice and Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which is on the federal level. So it would do a lot to reform policing across America. Give us your hot takes on it. What are your thoughts on, one, if it will be passed? Two, how much can this help really reform policing in America?
Well, first and foremost, Darren Harris is a great friend of mine.
Amazing.
We were talking back in December about the idea of me running for this seat.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That supported me in this race. I think the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is a great step towards progress, right? The decertification that I was just talking about is in there, along with a number of other things. The pitfall of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is the same reason I think it'll get passed. I think it'll get passed because what folks really don't want to see, and what the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act doesn't do, is divest from the carceral system. In fact, it offers new incentives, new rules. If you do these X, Y, and Z reforms, then you can have access to federal law enforcement resources. And that's different than, say, the Breathe Act, which hasn't been introduced yet, right? This idea that the federal government shouldn't be funding local police departments, shouldn't be funding the carceral system at all, that we should start thinking about our investments in communities in other ways. And so I think that's the challenge of it. And I think that's ultimately why it'll pass, because it's the kind of legislation that pushes the federal government further than they're comfortable, right? It does have real progress in it, but it's not as radical and transformative as our communities actually really need. So I'm hopeful that it will move the conversation forward, and then we get back to work and keep going. Because I also don't think the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and the Breathe Act, for example, should be juxtaposed in such a way that detracts the progress of both of them, right? We cannot have that kind of infighting when we've got so much opposition already against any forms of progress. And so that's kind of where I'm at on it. I'm watching closely and trying to figure out where the state of California can come in to complement, to aid, and push the conversation even that much further. But I have a lot of hope in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and a lot of hope in Congresswoman Karen Bass. I mean, she's never let us down before, and she comes out of this kind of organizing orientation that brought me to office as well.
Right. I was going to ask you if you were U.S. Senator, Bryan, what would your vote be? But it sounds like you would be for it, and then work to make it better and shape it how you would want to shape it. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So quickly in the chat, we do have a link to a toolkit that has a lot of information about police reform and some of the key points of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We also have a link to email your senator to support it, or give your thoughts. There's a pre-written email that is in support of it. You can also add in your own thoughts. So we will have that in the chat. We'll also have that in the notes for this recording as well later. So Assemblymember Bryan, I know you need to run because you are a super busy guy and you're out there fighting for us. I just really want to say thank you for joining, for inspiring the community, for getting your story out there. We hope to promote all the work that you're doing. Where can people follow you and follow the work that you're doing?
Yeah, you can follow me on my Assembly website for government information. You can also follow me on social media, IB2_real. And I also want to give a special shout out to Molly Watson. I see you in the chat. Always appreciate you, Molly.
Yeah, Molly's amazing. Actually, I will plug also the work of Molly's organization, Courage California. If you're in California, they have a great resource called the Courage Score, where you can look up your own legislator and see where they fall on specific policies or specific areas and issues. And so it's really good to see if your own legislator is representing your values. And if not, it's time to vote them out or run yourself and get involved. All right, Assemblymember Bryan, thank you again so much. I really appreciate you joining us, your time. This has been great. Kirk, if you want to stay on for a hot second, I just want to wrap it up with you, and then we'll let everybody get back to their evening. Thank you so much.
Great to be with y'all.
All right, take care. So that was really great. I don't know. I know that you weren't familiar with him prior to this, so I'm curious to hear your takes. From somebody who seems to represent their values in a place of policy. If you feel that this supports the work that you do, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first and foremost, that was the first time meeting it. It's so sharp, like sharp. And I think we're all in good hands in terms of even just the new politicians that are rising up. It's just like these guys and women that are coming up are just, incredible. And then just to hear the type of legislation that he's pushing, I think you and I had talked about this earlier or before. The way that we're moving as a community, and I speak as an African-American, it has to be a two-pronged approach. We need people like Assemblymember Bryan to go in there and fight for legislation. At the same time, we also too have to take care of who we are as a people and our mental health, and having that emotional availability to ideate ways to keep moving forward, because it's a journey at this point. I don't know. I think I used to think it was just like a one-time fix, like, okay, I think like everybody else, but living the experience and seeing just the many different avenues to go down and create change. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, it can be overwhelming, right? It can really be overwhelming, especially because, like I said, progress is slow, but progress does happen, and it happens when more voices are involved. There is power through people. That's really our mantra, and our belief. And so that's why we wanted to create a space for people to come together, talk about these issues, exactly what you're doing also. And I really want to highlight the work that you're doing with Melanin Meetups for people to discover and be part of this really amazing organization. You just had an event on Monday with Senator Cory Booker, with local LA County Supervisor Holly Mitchell, not Cory Bush, sorry. Sorry?
Park Cannon.
Yes, thank you. Park Cannon, who was the Georgia state representative who was locked out of the proceedings when they were voting on voting rights. So you're doing amazing work as well. So everybody check out Melanin Meetups as well. And I think, if we are attacking these problems these issues from all different avenues and aspects, we're going to start chipping away at it, and hopefully, make this crazy relationship, like you put it the other day, relationship we have with our country.
Toxic relationship. It's time to break up.
Yeah, it's time to break up with the crazy boyfriend, right?
Gaslighting needs to stop, man.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if we have any questions, but this will be this recording. These are brief. This is what we do at Same Side. We just, provide just some quick overviews, some ways to hear different perspectives. I hope Assemblymember Bryan was inspiring to understand just really, a little piece of what voting for folks that represent our values can do and what that means. So we'll continue to have these opportunities to meet with amazing people doing amazing work, and fighting for the issues that we all care about. So Kirk, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll keep doing more together. All right. Thank you, everybody. Hope it was a great evening. Oh, you all have a great evening. It was a great evening. It's just starting. And we'll see you again soon. Bye. Thanks.